Now, to lead our discussion today, I'd like to introduce you to the session moderator, Patricia Sullivan. Patricia Sullivan is an author, editor, transitions coach, public healthcare consultant, and rare disease advocate. With a strong commitment to improving the lives of others, she has more than 30 years of senior administration experience in public health and public mental health care, including her role as a director of clinical oversight and quality improvement for the Department of Psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. In 2019, Ms. Sullivan was diagnosed with acromegaly, a rare pituitary disorder caused by a benign brain tumor. For Ms. Sullivan, what started as a medical journey became a personal odyssey. Her book, An Uprooted Life, chronicles the emotional and physical impact of a rare disease diagnosis at midlife, as well as the challenges and opportunities of aging with a rare disorder. Ms. Sullivan now couples her professional experience with her personal story to help others navigate their patient journeys and life transitions. Ms. Sullivan has a master's degree in counseling psychology from Santa Clara University in California, as well as a master's degree in English literature from the University of Chicago. She currently volunteers with NORD, serving as the North Carolina Volunteer State Ambassador. And now I will turn it over to Patricia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi and welcome. I'm Patricia Sullivan, and as Stephanie mentioned, I'm the North Carolina Volunteer State Ambassador for NORD, and I just wanted to welcome everyone to our presentation today. And you may be wondering why aging with a rare condition as a topic. And living with a rare condition can impact us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and economically, and it presents its own set of challenges as we age. And some of the themes that often come up when you're aging with a rare condition include living with uncertainty or having anxiety about the future, feeling invisible or alone, issues around planning for our future care. How do we find a sense of fulfillment as we age with a rare disease, as well as issues of grief and loss. And this could be anticipatory loss about possibly not having physical independence or loss of mobility as we age. And we also try to maintain a sense of hope and resiliency in living with a rare disease. And I know some of these themes are common to the aging population in general, but often with a rare disease, they can actually be magnified for us. So I thought what we do today is we're going to share a little bit about our backgrounds and living with a rare condition, and then answer some questions about how we manage and some of the solutions that we have come up with in aging with a rare condition. And as Stephanie mentioned, I have acromegaly. I was diagnosed 2 years ago when I was 59. So about at the time I had moved from California to North Carolina after living in California for 35 years, getting ready to start the next chapter of my life, thinking I needed to kind of rest and regroup. After 3 months of living in North Carolina, I found out that I had acromegaly, and that was caused of some of the medical symptoms that I had been experiencing. So that wasn't quite the next chapter of my life that I had anticipated or planned for, especially since I had uprooted myself from my network back in California. And the other thing that pressed upon me at that time was, how will this look in terms of my own aging process? And with acromegaly, there's usually a cascade of other medical conditions that one can have. So it's a very complicated picture to tease out. So how will all of these medical conditions impact me as I age with acromegaly? So that's a little bit about my background. I'm going to turn it over to Kate Loring now. Kate is a behavioral scientist who has lived with Gaucher disease for nearly 80 years. She's a professor Emerita at Stanford University School of Medicine, and she's also a partner in the Self Management Resource Center. She has developed, evaluated, and widely implemented programs for older people living with chronic conditions, cancer survivors, people living with HIV/AIDS, as well as caregivers. So, Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you would like to speak a little bit more about your journey with Gaucher disease, as well as some of the challenges or concerns that you have about aging with a rare condition.
Certainly, and I'm very, very pleased to be with all of you today. Could we go to the next slide, please? Um, I don't even think about this as a journey with a disease because it's just been a journey because I've always had the disease as far as long as I could remember. I was diagnosed when I was 3. The little girl on your left in the front row is me, and fairly shortly, probably after I was diagnosed. And so at the time I was diagnosed, there was no treatment, so one just got on with life. And for me, that had some real advantages. I had a pretty normal childhood, except for lots and lots of tests and lots of doctors, and being the guinea pig for the beginning of corticosteroids, which have absolutely nothing to do with the disease, but people didn't know that at the time. Went to university, was a Peace Corps volunteer in Chile, worked in London for a couple of years, went to some more school, and then ended up being a faculty member at Stanford for 40 years, and now more recently am a partner in a startup company. So basically I've been able to lead a pretty full and normal life, and the life that was given me. Is it the same as everybody else's? Probably not, because there's always been problems. But I think the important thing is that some of us do grow up and some of us do get old. And as we age, probably the considerations that we have are a little bit different. So, what are some of the challenges of aging with a rare disease? I think they're different at different ages. At a very young age, I decided not to have any children. And I did that because I didn't want to pass on genes. At that point, there was no treatment. So that means that now as I'm older, I do not have the support of a family that many other people would probably have. Also, as one gets older, one gets other chronic conditions. And of course, no one knows whether it has to do with the condition you have, the rare condition, or whether it has, or symptoms have to do with a new condition. That's always a problem. And no one in the health community or anyone else knows how these conditions interact. No one has any idea about how rare conditions affect aging, because I feel very fortunate in being one of the pioneers. I'm one of the very few people that's actually been able to age with a chronic condition. There are no advocates for those of us that are aging with rare diseases. This is even in this conference, there are no special sessions for older people. There are for children and for siblings and for teens and all kinds of other folks, parents, but nothing for those of us that are older. And there really are no advocates. There's no experts. We're kind of the experts. We're the pioneers. And then there's also very limited and expensive supplemental insurance and insurance choices and living choices for those of us that are older. And I can talk about some of those a little bit later.
So next I'm going to be introducing Mr. Nathan Peck. And Nathan is the founder and CEO of Cure VCP Disease, which is a patient advocacy organization dedicated to driving a cure for Valicin-containing protein associated with multisystem proteinopathy, which is also known by the acronym IBM-PFD. or inclusion body myopathy associated with early onset Paget's disease of bone and frontotemporal dementia. The disease is adult onset and hereditary and can affect any combination of a patient's muscles, bones, and brain. Nathan is a patient with the disease and was officially diagnosed in 2015. Both his mother and aunt are deceased from the disease, and he has two uncles living with VCP disease. Now Mr. Peck is retired on full disability and has quickly grown the awareness and influence of cure VCP disease among the research and patient community since 2018. He holds a Bachelor of Industrial Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and was a Leaders for Global Operations Fellow at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, obtaining both an MBA and a Master's of Civil and Environmental Engineering in 2009. He currently lives in Georgia and is the proud husband of 21 years to Allison and the father of 3 boys, Matthew, Davis, and Ryan. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Nathan, if you would like to tell a little bit more about your story and some of the challenges or concerns that you have about aging with a rare condition.
Sure. Thank you, Patricia, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Nord, for the opportunity to speak with this distinguished panel. Patricia, we tried to throw a tongue twister at you there with that first paragraph. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the disease is a mouthful. Just quickly, where my journey is a little different, and I still consider myself a spring chicken, but I am aging. And, the process where it's different is I saw my mother go through this disease. And so from the time I started college until her death in 2014, we saw what happened in the aging process and the challenges. And so where I didn't go through the diagnostic journey because I knew that there was a chance that I could get this disease, seeing what the future looks like can be very discouraging as well. And so I share that family picture, from 2008, because you can see 4 out of 6 siblings, 3 of them were in wheelchairs at the time. My aunt in the far back, the left, was going to be in a wheelchair pretty soon, and for her it was a very rapid decline. So the aging process happened quickly. But what you can't see from my mom is she could barely lift her hand. She could barely operate her powered wheelchair. Her thumb didn't work. My dad had to care for her in terms of the bathroom, feeding her, bathing her, everything. And so the disease, I'm not going to get into the detail. We have that Venn diagram at the top, but a patient can get 1, 2, 3, or even 4, phenotypes. And so, I have the inclusion body myopathy, which most patients get. Been tested for Paget's, don't have that. And so part of that journey is continually getting tested and watching that. But the disease is a lot like ALS, but just on a much slower time horizon. So, certainly the challenges for me going forward is I continue to get weaker. I'm still ambulatory at this time, but when do I stop being ambulatory? Is it another year or 2 of walking? When do we get equipment? And so as I'm aging, these are the challenges. What kind of accessibility options do we think about? Certainly, tools to help me, building ramps in the house, vacations, where do we go, where I can get into showers and things like that. From the financial planning standpoint, we made some wise decisions, again, because we had intelligence about the disease and that it was 50-50, and so we did some things to where that certainly has helped going forward. But from my standpoint, you don't know when things are going to happen, but you have to prepare for those when events. And so the aging process for me is how do I change my life and accommodations to where I can still support my family. And certainly the reason that Cure VCP and what we're doing as an organization is because of my children. So I'll kind of leave the introduction there, and We're happy to take questions from everybody, and we'll continue to evolve the conversation. So, Patricia, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Um, okay, so I guess my question for you, Kate and Nathan, would be what are some of the ways your family, friends, caregivers can best support you now in your disease process, as well as what are some of the ways that you support yourself in your disease process at the current time?
Yeah, I'm really pretty much responsible for supporting myself in my disease process. As I said, I don't have children, and while I do have siblings, they live at a long distance from me. And so a lot of my planning has to be, how do I, plan for my future? How do I plan for my day to day? And, you know, how can friends help me? There are some ways they can, uh, but a lot of it really sits on my shoulders. Being part of a online disease group, Gaucher's group is very helpful because at least there I'm in contact with other people on the same journey. But I think we kind of make an assumption in this life that there's always kind of these friends and family support for rare diseases, and unfortunately, that's not always true.
Yeah, I break it into there's a psychological component and then the physical component. And so, certainly from the psychological component, how I kind of, it's important to stay sharp, I think, with the mind. And I think you see that with Kate. Kate has stayed busy, how acclaimed she is. I think starting Cure VCP disease, has helped keep me very active and engaged. My fear, for, when I went on long-term disability was sitting at home doing nothing, and so staying busy and engaged, talking on Zoom with people and just continuing to learn has been really valuable in terms of aging with this disease because, as Kate says, you do have to rely on yourself a lot. And when I fall, um, you know, the, right now I can get myself back up. But at some point, and this is the physical aspect, is I have to be able to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so, kind of getting over myself and my pride, and being able to, so when I got my scooter for the first time because we wanted to go on a trip to Universal Studios, it hurt a little bit, but it was just something that I needed to bite the bullet and do. I now have a little for our couch. Getting up off the couch is really difficult, and we have this little seat that I can sit on that gives me a little boost getting up. One time I got stuck in a booth at a restaurant and asking the kids to help and making jokes about it, kind of using humor, just kind of keeps it light. Do I get angry about it inside? Absolutely. But, kind of getting over that. And so, there's going to be more steps to come. As it, trying to teach my kids how to do yard work or things in the yard. I mean, it's almost impossible now because if I fall or bend down or do something, I mean, it could be, a big challenge. So I think the psychological component is staying busy, being engaged, active. I think, to your question, Patricia, about friends, friends and family and caregivers reaching out to you, and talking about your condition or issues. There's nothing wrong with that. And actually it's a great outlet, and I think helps the mental health piece. So I don't know. I think,
Mm-hmm.
trying to treat things as normal as possible, but acknowledge it's okay to acknowledge that something's changed and will continue to change. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think that helping others to understand um, that you do have a rare condition and what accommodations need to be made. And I'll give you just one example, and that is that I do a lot of traveling and a lot of international traveling. And I always tell people I am perfectly willing to do anything you want from 8 in the morning until 8 at night. But
Mhm.
at 8 at night, I turn into a pumpkin, and that includes dinners.
Mhm.
So, you know, if I'm in Spain, I just tell my hosts in Spain, I know that you all eat at 9:30 at night.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I can't join you.
Mhm.
And they worry about that and they fuss about that a little bit. But it's just part of life that I need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a day to be able to function at all, and I always have needed that. And so it's up to me to try to get people to understand what it is I need so that I can do for them what they'd like me to do, and also so that I don't go out of my mind.
Yeah. I would also add to that. I know for myself, one of the issues with acromegaly is fatigue and exhaustion. Um, and part of my diagnosis, I had almost an incapacitating fatigue that I thought was just, oh, I was overworked, I was doing too much. Um, I had ways to kind of dismiss it. I was always busy, just maybe a little burned out, wasn't thinking it was anything very life changing or altering. And I know even now, since my neurosurgery and the brain tumor was removed, and I am on medication to treat my acromegaly, I don't have the same abundance of energy that I used to have. I always had a million irons in the fire, and sort of what's the next thing I was going to achieve. And acromegaly has slowed me down. And I know there's almost a discomfort that I have some days that I realize there's not a day that goes by that I just don't think about it. Um, Maybe in time it'll be more normal to me. I don't know. But there's truly not a day that it's not part of my thought process and my emotional process of living with a rare disease. And that's been an adjustment for me also. And like you, Kate, I'm I live by myself. I've pretty much always supported myself. I'm highly resilient, but I do think about the challenges ahead of me in having a rare disease and what that will look like. And I don't like you, Nathan. I don't like to necessarily ask for help, um, but I've had to reach out and ask for more help since my diagnosis and my surgery and moving to North Carolina. So that's been a big adjustment for me. And um, I'm still highly mobile, can do many of the things that I used to do, but I have to lean on friends a little bit more than I'm accustomed to doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always prided
There's
myself on being able to take care of everything for myself also. So I don't know if there's,
Yeah, that
go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, I mean, the lack of independence, I mean, is certainly a fear. I mean, I don't live in fear of it, but it's not something that so I try to take care of myself in terms of different, just don't ever take it for granted. I don't do that anymore. I don't take that independence and the ability to do different things for granted at all. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, for for Gaucher's disease, there's actually a treatment. So I feel incredibly fortunate on that uh, account. On the other account, the treatment comes with its own sets of problems. One is that I need to have infusions every 2 weeks, and those infusions can only be done in very specialized infusion centers. Um, Not because the infusion is so hard, but because people are very frightened of handling the drug because it happens to be one of the very most expensive in the world today. And so I have to basically plan my life around the fact that I need to show up at a specific infusion center every 2 weeks. And that's not a terrible thing to do, but it's just kind of another complication in life.
Mhm.
Uh, And then maybe at some point or another we can talk about the problems of very expensive treatments. As I said, there's the good side is that there is a treatment and it is pretty effective. The bad side is that it comes with its own side effects, which have to do with time and finance.
Okay. Well, that's a segue actually into my next question for you two. And it's about how we plan for our care in the future. And we've touched upon this, but I don't know if you'd like to say more about sort of when you think into your future life. What sort of supports are you going to need? How are you going to plan with family and your caregivers? Or, like for you, Kate, if you don't have children or family nearby, what sort of support are you going to set up for yourself as you think about planning for your future life?
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing to do the planning. And part of it is because I am planning to move into continuing care community. It has independent living and assisted living and skilled nursing. So that piece of the plan is fine. Whether I'm actually going to be able to do that is totally uncertain because most continuing care communities require some sort of a physical. And when you talk to them and say, basically I'm as healthy as all other older people, except I have Gaucher's disease, then their eyes go blank. And their medical director's eyes go blank. And their system's eyes go blank because they've never had to deal with this before. And so when it comes right down to it, whether I'll ever be admitted or not is a real question. And I have no control over that whatever. And so there always has to be a plan B to that. And the plan B will have to be in-home caregivers. And as I said, that's part of the problem. Um, the other real problem has to do with insurance because I happen to, because the treatment is so very expensive. And by expensive, I mean close to $1 million a year, all said and done. Um, a lot of insurance plans are just out of the question because they require a 20% copay. Well, 20% copays are not that much, except when you're talking about that much money, they become a whole lot more, no matter how wealthy you are. And so it's very limited insurance choices. And again, it kind of depends on your whatever Medicare's changes decide to be, whatever the system's changes decide to be, whatever the insurer's changes decide to be. And those are a lot of the uncertainties that I have very little control over. I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future because more and more we're seeing treatments for rare diseases. And my guess is, with a little bit of luck, Nathan, you're going to be the last generation in your position. I know very little about your disease, but my guess is that that's true. That's probably true with a good many of the genetic diseases, at least. So that's the good news. The bad news is that brings with it a whole nother set of problems.
Yeah, agreed. The insurance piece, that's a challenge. I don't have to, we haven't had to worry about. We getting a therapeutic is half the battle right now. But I agree with you completely that we're going to see a whole set of new challenges. This aging piece with those that do have therapies, as well as we as advocates continue to educate everybody. I mean, trying to draw, increase awareness of our disease and education, how the disease works. Insurance companies, disability insurance, long-term care, everybody gets a little smarter about this, and they're going to be more discriminating, especially as there aren't rules and regulations except on the medical side. The GINA Act, that's on your medical insurance piece, but not on disability and insurance and life insurance. I was after I had my genetic test and was diagnosed, could not get life insurance, especially to ramp up my life insurance. And so, to Patricia's question, I mean, as I plan, certainly taking care of my family and making sure financially we're in a good position is of the utmost importance. And so, as I mentioned at the very beginning, because I had some intelligence about this disease, we made some, wise financial decisions early on in my career, to where, we're not as financially impacted. But what we do as an organization within our disease is try to educate everybody as much as possible, especially before you get a genetic test. Try to have your financial matters in order before you ever get a genetic test. It's so important because you can be discriminated against after that. So, my future is just more medical equipment and assistive devices, powered wheelchair, things like that. The unknown is on what time horizon. I have a lot of issues in my hand. How long am I going to be able to type? How long be able to use a mouse? I mean, those are all but the main thing is my children, I don't want them assisting and helping. I don't want them sticking around, to help dad. I want them to go live their life, go off and do that. And, my wife and I will figure this out as we kind of go along. And if we need to call help in, then we will. But, certainly from a house standpoint, I know some other patients in my disease have done, they've made lodging decisions based on, one floor, no stairs, showers, roll-in showers with the ability to reconfigure easily. And so those are all considerations that have to be made. Not where I'm being ignorant of my disease or defensive about it, that I don't want to deal with it at some point, but these are things that, we've just kind of opened up to, that we need to be prepared years down the road so that it's not so costly and expensive to do it. So, we had a boat at one time. When I started having issues getting in the boat, sold the boat. It's out of our lives. We're just not gonna to deal with it. And so these are, those are the hard decisions to make. I don't know, Kate, if you had more to talk about the insurance piece. I mean, that's certainly very interesting, and it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think if we have viewers here that are kind of watching this, even if you're much younger and you know, and there is no treatment for your disease today, to consider the fact that that there may someday be treatment. And that if there is treatment, because of the way the Orphan Drug Act was written, it's probably going to be incredibly expensive. And so given that, I think this whole issue of planning for a financial future to the best that you're able to do, and I understand that not everybody is able to do that. And I think Nathan's advice about making plans before you have genetic testing. I mean, I obviously didn't have that choice. I was much too young, and for those of you with young children with rare diseases, this is not possible. But where you are possible, I think that these things all need to be considered, because you never know what's kind of down the road. And I think it's also really important that we become advocates at the congressional and Medicare and Medicaid levels so that we don't get forgotten. Because in the past, what has happened is that access to treatment has not been blocked by expense for the most part. And that's because we're rare, and therefore we're just a blip on the screen for most insurance companies or for Medicare. That's not going to be true in the future. And so I think access to treatment may very well become an issue. It certainly is in other countries. And it's one of the things that I think, again, we have to plan for, we have to advocate against.
Can I ask you and Kate a question real quick? Do you have living wills and everything kind of established and documented? Because I know, my mom the end was very sudden, but having that living will for my dad, that she, in quality of life, was really important to her. She did not want a trach, and so the fact that it was documented in there that, if a trach was required to keep her living, that, she did not want that. And so I'm just curious, for you and Kate, as morbid as it is, having that certainty, and especially for you guys without no, family, family close or relatives that, support. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've certainly had those documents in place for many, many years. And I would suggest, by the way, that it's not just for us that are aging, because we're all aging, that this is a really good topic. I mean, probably not for little children, but by the time kids are in their teens, to discuss and to consider for an entire family. Because one never knows exactly what's going to happen, and a lot of family distress can be avoided by having durable powers of attorney, clauses, and these are all different legal terms. But it's worth finding out in your state exactly what is necessary, and then talking with all family members. And when I say all family members, I mean from teens kind of on up, so that it becomes a family
Yeah.
affair. It doesn't just become
And
your problem.
to answer your question, Nathan, yes, I revised everything when I had to go in for my neurosurgery because I'm totally chicken when it comes to surgery, and there is something about having brain surgery that completely freaked me out, so to speak. So I revised everything prior to my surgery, so all of my wishes could be observed. Okay. So any other comments you'd like to make before we move on?
Yeah, I'm just kind of amazed at the three of us have very different conditions with very different manifestations.
Hmm.
But what we're talking about is very much the same. And I think one of the problems in the rare disease world, which by the way is common in the not rare disease world too, is that we silo things so much
Hmm.
that we don't understand the commonalities. And that I would like us to spend more time, not more time talking about the commonalities of having a child with a rare disease, the commonalities of being a teen with a rare disease, the commonalities of making decisions about childbearing or not childbearing with a rare disease, the commonalities of aging with a rare disease. And I think if we could do that, we would move the rare disease world many steps forward, because there's too few of us and too many diseases to do it on a disease by disease basis. And while Pat's and Nathan's and my futures and diseases are very different, what I hear is that our concerns and what we need to do to live on a day to day basis are probably very similar. And the skills that we need to live on a day to day basis are probably also very similar.
What a beautiful
I know
closing.
that was lovely.
That I
Thank you.
have nothing to
You
add. That was wonderful.
summarized it quite well, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. Um, that looking to our commonalities is where we're going to find our strength, and supporting each other and through our various processes. Um, any last comments from you, Nathan, that you would like to make?
No, I'm good. Kate
Okay.
said it.
I just want
Right.
to really thank you two for being here today and contributing and um, sharing your stories and sort of some of your solutions, and even when we don't have solutions, what it is we're trying to grapple with in our lives and find solutions for. Um, and as you know, just to reiterate once again and underscore what Kate said, if we could look at our commonalities and and find support in that for how we can address some of these challenges and concerns that we have, I think it really would help move all of us forward in the rare disease community. And thank you for being pioneers also in aging with a rare condition. And it was my
We're
pleasure.
just thankful.
Yeah, it was my pleasure to participate with you two today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.